Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten corners of Saskatchewan's isolated small towns, places where endless farmland stretches into silent darkness, where empty highways cut through miles of wilderness, and where help does not reach when something begins watching from the shadows. Hidden within these quiet communities are 7 of the most disturbing horror stories ever reported. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Saskatchewan's forgotten small towns, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened during a winter retreat to a small, forgotten corner of Saskatchewan known as Black Hollow. The town itself was quiet, abandoned in parts, surrounded by dense forests and frozen lakes where the wind howled like something alive. I had rented an old cabin on the outskirts for solitude, thinking it would be the perfect escape from the city. The first night was uneventful. Just the howl of the wind and the creaking of the frozen forest. But by the second evening, I noticed faint scratches on the wooden walls, too precise to be caused by weather, and the temperature inside the cabin dropped suddenly, despite the heater running. Shadows seemed to move independently in the corners of the room, and I felt a presence that was watching my every move. I tried to convince myself it was stress or imagination, but then I heard it. A low, rasping whisper, barely audible, coming from the floorboards, calling my name. My blood ran cold as I realized I was not alone. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound, my hands trembling. The beam illuminated nothing unusual at first, only frost-covered furniture and the cracked wooden floorboards. But then I noticed deep scratches leading from the corner of the room toward the cellar door, which I had not explored. The whispers grew louder, sibilant and urgent, echoing off the walls in a way that made my skin crawl. Summoning what courage I had, I opened the cellar door, revealing a pitch-black stairwell. A sudden gust of icy air blasted up, extinguishing my flashlight and plunging me into darkness. I could hear soft, dragging footsteps below, circling, almost deliberate, accompanied by the faint, metallic clink of something being moved. I fumbled to turn the flashlight back on, and when I did, the beam caught a shadowy figure at the bottom of the stairs, tall and indistinct, hunched as if waiting for me to descend. The whispering intensified, forming words I could almost comprehend. "Come closer," sending a shiver of dread through my entire body. I hesitated at the top of the cellar stairs, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The shadowed figure didn't move, yet I could feel it tracking my every heartbeat. The whispers now merged into a low, guttural chant, filling the cabin with a presence that pressed against my chest. Summoning every ounce of courage, I took a cautious step down, the wood groaning beneath my weight. The figure shifted slightly, revealing long, thin limbs that bent in unnatural angles. Its face remained hidden, but I could sense a malicious intent radiating from it, a hunger that had been waiting for someone foolish enough to enter. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and the flashlight illuminated a small, frost-covered room. Old furniture lay overturned, and the floorboards were slick with ice. In the corner, I saw symbols etched into the wood, dark and intricate, forming a pattern that seemed almost alive, pulsating faintly in the flashlight beam. Fear clutched my heart as I realized the cabin had been preparing for me long before my arrival. The whispers grew louder, now almost intelligible, carrying fragments of words like trapped and forever. My hands shook as I examined the symbols. They seemed to twist subtly under my gaze, as if alive, feeding on my fear. The shadowed figure began gliding slowly toward me, its limbs unnaturally long, bending at impossible angles, scraping the ice beneath it with a hollow metallic sound. I stumbled backward, the floor slick with frost, making every movement treacherous. My breath fogged in the frigid air as panic surged, and I realized that leaving the cabin wasn't going to be simple. The door I had entered through now looked impossibly distant, as if the cellar had grown larger in the shadows. I aimed the flashlight toward the corner again, and the symbols seemed to writhe, pulsating in a rhythmic pattern that matched my heartbeat. The figure stopped just short of the symbols, as if waiting for me to make the next move, testing my fear, drawing me deeper into the cabin's frozen, malevolent grip. I backed into the corner of the cellar, my flashlight shaking as the figure glided closer. The shadows it cast on the walls seemed elongated, twisting and alive, moving independently of the figure. The whispers had become a rasping chant, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones. Suddenly, the air grew impossibly cold, frosting my eyelashes and coating the floor in a thin sheen of ice. The figure stopped just short of the symbols, raising one long, spindly arm as if to command the very air around me. I could feel a pressure building, a force that seemed to push against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, with a sudden movement, the symbols on the floor flared with a ghostly blue light, illuminating the figure completely. Its featureless face seemed darker than the shadows themselves, and I understood in that instant that the cabin was alive, feeding on my fear, and the figure was its enforcer, guiding me toward an unimaginable fate. I stumbled backward, tripping over the icy floorboards, and the figure glided forward without a sound, closing the distance between us in a way that defied natural movement. The whispers became more coherent, almost commanding, as though the cabin itself had begun to speak through the figure. Desperate, I scanned the room for any escape. The stairs I had descended seemed longer, darker, stretching into a void, and the door that had led outside appeared unnaturally far away, as if the cabin had shifted while I wasn't looking. My flashlight flickered wildly, illuminating the figure in intermittent bursts, each time revealing more of its elongated limbs and unnatural posture. I realized that standing still was not an option. I had to act, or I would become part of the cabin's collection. With a deep, shuddering breath, I rushed toward the far corner, hoping to find a path that the figure could not predict, praying that I might escape Black Hollow before the cabin claimed me completely. I sprinted toward the far corner, the icy floorboards cracking beneath me, and the whispers escalated into a piercing chorus, echoing off the frozen walls. The shadowed figure mirrored my movements, gliding effortlessly, its long, spindly limbs bending in ways that made my stomach churn. Every step I took seemed predicted, as if the cabin itself anticipated my escape. The glowing symbols flared brighter, illuminating the corners of the cellar with an otherworldly blue light. The figure paused, tilting its head unnaturally, then gestured toward a narrow passage I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind stacked firewood. Fear warred with hope. I had found a potential escape, yet approaching it felt like walking into a trap. My breath came in ragged gasps, fogging in the freezing air, and I realized the cabin had shaped itself to test me, feeding off every ounce of fear, every heartbeat, every moment of hesitation. I steeled myself, knowing that one wrong move could seal my fate. I lunged toward the hidden passage, the floor slick beneath my boots. The figure followed silently, its form hovering and stretching unnaturally, each movement precise, deliberate, almost inhuman. The whispers now felt like they were inside my skull, guiding me, taunting me, warning me. And I shivered as the icy air cut through my clothes. The passage led into a small storage room, dimly illuminated by the glow from the cellar behind me. Old supplies, crates, and tools littered the space, but the floor beneath me was stable. I dared a glance back. The figure lingered at the entrance, watching, motionless yet terrifyingly alive. Its head tilted as if evaluating my determination. I realized that the cabin wasn't just haunted. It was a sentient trap, shaping the space and guiding intruders like a predator. My only hope was to move quickly through the storage room and find the back door I had glimpsed earlier, praying that the cabin's hunger would be satisfied enough to let me escape. I crept through the storage room, every nerve screaming as the whispers followed me, now more frantic, more insistent, echoing off the frozen walls. The back door was just ahead, a faint sliver of moonlight spilling through the cracked wood. My hands were numb, my breath ragged, but I forced myself to move faster. The shadowed figure glided toward me once more, silent but inexorably advancing, its elongated limbs scraping the icy floor with a hollow metallic sound. I could feel its gaze like a weight on my shoulders, cold and unyielding. The glowing symbols behind me pulsed one final time, casting distorted shadows across the walls that seemed to reach for me. With a desperate lunge, I reached the back door and yanked it open, the icy wind of the night hitting my face like a blast of freedom. I stumbled out into the snow, not daring to look back as the cabin loomed silently behind me, whispering my name in the fading wind. I ran blindly through the snow-covered forest, adrenaline propelling me forward, the whispers fading but still lingering at the edges of my mind. The cabin disappeared behind a curtain of trees, appearing almost ordinary under the moonlight. Yet I knew the evil that lurked within its frozen walls was very real. Eventually, I reached the main road and flagged down a passing vehicle. The warmth of the heater, the hum of the engine, and the sight of civilization all felt surreal after the terror of Black Hollow. I never returned, and locals told me the cabin had a long history of claiming the curious and the foolish, feeding on fear and leaving nothing but frozen silence in its wake. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of the shadowed figure and the glowing symbols, and I can still hear the faint whisper of my name carried on the icy wind of Black Hollow. The memory serves as a warning. Some places are alive, and they do not forgive intrusion. My name is Clara Voss, and this happened during my first solo hiking trip in the remote forests of northern Saskatchewan, near a place locals call Frostbite Hollow. The area is dense with towering pines, frozen streams, and thick underbrush. It's the kind of place where silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels watchful. I had planned a weekend getaway to photograph the winter wilderness, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, an eerie sensation settled over the forest. The trees seemed to lean closer, their long shadows stretching unnaturally across the snow. Then I heard it. A soft, sibilant whisper carried by the wind. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the whispers grew clearer, forming words I couldn't understand. I followed the trail cautiously, trying to ignore the voice. But with each step, the whispers seemed to circle around me, coming from all directions. Yet, I could never see their source. My heart pounded as I realized I was no longer alone in the forest. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting, winding through the trees in a rhythm that made my chest tighten. I stopped and spun around, but the forest appeared empty, silent except for the rustle of dry pine needles beneath my boots. Then I noticed movement between the trees, a flicker of shadow too fast and fluid to be human. I raised my camera, hoping to catch a glimpse, but all I captured was the blur of something tall and thin disappearing behind the trunks. my breath fogged in the icy air as panic began to take hold. I tried to retreat along the trail, but it seemed to twist in on itself, no longer matching the map or the path I remembered. The whispers now carried a sense of urgency, calling me deeper into the hollow. Every instinct told me to run, but the forest was alive with shadows that shifted and waited, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had chosen me. I forced myself to keep moving, pressing through the snow-laden underbrush. The forest seemed to shift around me, the towering pines bending slightly, their long shadows stretching in ways that made my mind reel. The whispers followed me, now overlapping and forming a dreadful rhythm, like voices echoing from every direction at once. Then I saw it, a figure standing still between the trees, tall and thin, its form almost blending with the shadows. The snow crunched under my boots, but the figure made no sound. It simply watched, head tilted unnaturally, as if measuring my fear. I could feel the weight of its gaze, cold and unrelenting. I tried to call out, but my voice was swallowed instantly by the stillness. The figure began to move, gliding with a grace that defied human motion, and every step it took left the snow undisturbed, as if it didn't truly touch the ground. A sudden chill ran through me, and I realized that I wasn't just being followed. I was being hunted. The forest seemed to close in around me. Every turn I took, the whispers followed, growing louder, forming half words I couldn't comprehend. My breath came in shallow gasps, freezing instantly in the cold air. I stopped beside a frozen stream, hoping to gather my thoughts. That's when I noticed the figure again, now closer, its thin limbs stretching unnaturally as it glided above the snow. Its head tilted unnervingly, and the shadows it cast seemed to ripple across the forest floor like dark water. The whispers now formed a rhythmic cadence, pulsing through my skull, echoing off the trees. I realized that the forest itself seemed alive, the pines bending toward me subtly, as if guiding the figure toward me. Panic surged through my veins, and I knew I had to find shelter, or this shadow would consume me completely. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the trail behind me had vanished, swallowed by the ever-shifting maze of Frostbite Hollow. I stumbled through the snow, every branch and root seeming to grab at me as the whispers grew louder, almost chanting my name. The forest around me seemed alive, twisting and bending to obscure my path. My flashlight flickered in the dense fog, illuminating glimpses of the thin, shadowed figure that moved effortlessly through the trees. The snow beneath me began to feel strange, soft in some spots, almost liquid in others, as though the forest itself was swallowing me. Every instinct screamed to stop, but fear pushed me forward. The whispers intensified, circling me, coming from inside my own head, pressing me toward a dark cluster of pines up ahead. I could just make out a faint glow emanating from the forest floor. It pulsed like a heartbeat, rhythmic and deliberate. The figure paused at the edge of this glow, as if waiting for me to approach, the shadows around it quivering unnaturally in the icy air. I approached cautiously, every step tentative, my breath misting in the frigid air. The whispers were deafening now, wrapping around me like a physical force, and the shadows between the trees twisted unnaturally, stretching toward me. I could see multiple faint figures emerging from the fog, gliding silently, all thin and featureless, their presence overwhelming the senses. The glowing patch of snow beneath the largest tree in the clearing seemed almost alive. It pulsed in rhythm with the hum of the forest, and the figure stood motionless beside it, hooded and elongated, head tilting as if observing me. I realized with a jolt that the glow and the figures were connected. The light seemed to summon the shadows, drawing me closer to their trap. I stumbled backward, slipping in the snow, but the forest seemed to shift again, closing off my retreat. Panic surged as I understood the horrifying truth. The whispers, the figures, and the hollow itself were all working in unison, hunting me. I forced myself to stand, heart hammering as the whispers crescendoed into a hollow, almost musical chant. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, and the figures began moving in a synchronized glide, their long, thin limbs stretching unnaturally as they surrounded me. I could feel their gaze even though the faces were featureless, and a primal fear gripped me. I was completely at their mercy. The pulsing glow beneath the largest pine grew brighter, casting distorted shadows that danced across the snow in impossible angles. I realized then that stepping closer to it wasn't a choice. I was being drawn forward by the hollow itself. Every instinct screamed to run, but the forest shifted subtly with every step I took, closing off escape routes. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. The glow of the pulsing snow was the only thing guiding me, and the whispers now sounded almost like laughter, echoing off the pines in a chilling, otherworldly tone. I edged closer to the glowing snow, noticing it pulsated in rhythm with my racing heartbeat. The shadowed figures shifted, forming a tight circle around the pulsing light, as if guarding some ancient, terrible secret. The whispers now carried words I could almost understand, a warning, a chant, a summoning, but their meaning remained maddeningly out of reach. The fog seemed to thicken into walls around me, pressing in like icy hands, and I realized the hollow was alive, sentient, manipulating the snow, the shadows, and the whispers. One of the figures raised a long, spindly arm, pointing toward the center of the glow, as if beckoning me to step forward, offering no choice but compliance. Fear warred with curiosity, and I found myself taking cautious steps closer. Every inch revealed more of the unnatural forms lurking in the fog. Figures whose elongated limbs and featureless faces made them seem less human and more elemental, as if born from the forest itself. My legs shook as I stepped closer to the glowing snow. The whispers intensified, now overlapping voices, chanting in a language I couldn't understand, vibrating through my bones. The shadowed figures remained perfectly still, yet I could feel their attention zeroed in on me, their presence weighing down the forest like a physical force. The pulsing glow seemed to respond to my heartbeat, brightening with each terrified step. I realized with a sinking horror that the hollow itself was feeding off my fear, guiding me toward the center of the circle. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, but the fog had shifted behind me, my escape route gone. As I reached the glowing patch, the figures moved in unison, tilting forward, their elongated limbs stretching toward the light, creating a tunnel of shadows. The whispers rose to a crescendo, almost deafening, and I felt a tug, not of my body, but of my very mind, drawing me closer to the forest's ancient secret. I stumbled backward in terror, the forest seeming to breathe and shift around me. The whispers faded slightly, replaced by a low hum that resonated from the glowing snow itself. The figures receded slowly into the fog, their forms stretching and dissolving until they were nothing more than shadows among the pines. I ran blindly through the snow, following what little I recognized of the trail, my breath clouding in the cold night air. When I finally emerged from Frostbite Hollow, the forest behind me seemed calm, as if nothing had ever stirred within its depths. But I could still hear the faint echo of whispers, carried on the wind, a reminder that the hollow was alive, patient, and eternal. I never returned to those woods. Locals say that the whispering pines claim the unwary, guiding them into the hollow to join the chorus of voices. I was lucky to escape, but I carry the memory of the forest's silent, watchful hunger to this day. My name is Daniel Harper, and this happened when I was 23 years old, living in a small farming town in rural Saskatchewan. If you've never been out there, it's hard to explain just how empty it feels. Miles of wheat fields stretch in every direction, broken only by lonely farmhouses and gravel roads that disappear into the horizon. At night, it becomes even worse. No city lights, no traffic, just wind moving through the wheat like whispers in the dark. My family owned a farm just outside town, and every summer I helped my father maintain the land. It was quiet work, but I liked it. The isolation made everything feel peaceful. At least, it used to. The first strange thing happened late one evening while I was driving the combine back toward the barn. The sun had already dropped below the horizon, leaving the fields in that strange blue twilight where shapes blur together. And that's when I noticed something standing in the wheat. At first, I thought it was a scarecrow. But then it moved. I stopped the combine immediately. The engine idled loudly as I stared across the wheat field, trying to focus on the shape. It stood about 50 yards away, barely visible between the tall stalks. At first, I told myself it had to be a neighbor walking through the fields. But nobody walked out here after dark, not without a truck. And besides, something about the way it stood felt wrong. Completely still. No shifting, no waving, no sign of movement at all. I climbed down from the combine and stepped onto the dry soil. The wind brushed through the wheat with a hollow rustling sound. "Hello?" I called. No response. The figure remained there, half hidden in the crops. Then, slowly, it turned toward me. Even from that distance, I could tell something about its shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin. And the arms, they looked far too long. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The wind continued pushing through the wheat, creating waves that rolled across the field. But the figure itself stayed completely still. I remember feeling this strange tightening in my chest, like my instincts were trying to warn me about something my brain hadn't figured out yet. "Hey!" I shouted again, louder this time. Still nothing. I took a few cautious steps forward into the wheat. The stalks brushed against my legs, making a dry whispering sound as I pushed through them. That's when the figure suddenly took a step back. Not a normal step. It moved in this slow, unnatural way, almost like its limbs weren't bending the way a person should. The motion made my stomach turn. "Do you need help?" I asked, forcing a nervous laugh. The thing tilted its head slightly to the side. Then, without warning, it stepped deeper into the wheat and disappeared. The stalks swallowed it instantly. But the wheat continued moving, like something very tall was still walking through it. I stood there listening. The wheat about 30 yards ahead kept shifting, bending in a slow path away from me, like something massive was walking deeper into the field. But I couldn't see the thing anymore, just the movement. My first thought was that it had to be someone playing a prank. Maybe one of the guys from town trying to scare me. But the movement didn't stop. It kept going, farther and farther into the wheat. And then I realized something that made my skin crawl. The wheat was almost 7 feet tall that season, yet whatever was moving through it was clearly higher than the crops. Every few seconds, I could see the top of the stalks shaking violently, like something taller than the field itself was forcing its way through. That meant whatever I saw earlier was standing completely upright, and it had been watching me the entire time. Suddenly, the movement in the wheat stopped. The entire field went still. And somewhere out there, something let out a slow breath. I didn't realize how quiet the field had become until my own breathing started sounding too loud in my ears. The wind had completely stopped. The wheat stood still around me, like thousands of frozen spears pointing into the darkening sky. And somewhere ahead of me, something was breathing. It wasn't loud. In fact, if I hadn't been standing perfectly still, I might not have noticed it at all. But once I heard it, I couldn't ignore it. Slow, heavy, like lungs far larger than a human's pulling in air. My instincts finally kicked in. Every part of my body suddenly screamed the same message. Leave. I slowly began stepping backward toward the combine, trying not to make any sudden movements. The wheat brushed against my arms and legs as I retreated. That's when the breathing stopped. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. And then, somewhere inside the field, something began walking toward me. The sound was unmistakable. Heavy footsteps pushing through the wheat, snapping dry stalks as something forced its way forward. But the steps weren't rushed. They were slow, deliberate, almost like whatever was out there knew it didn't need to hurry. My heart began pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I turned and hurried back toward the combine, trying to stay calm, but every step I took made the wheat rustle loudly around me. Behind me, the footsteps kept coming, and they were getting closer. I finally reached the machine and climbed the metal ladder as fast as I could. My hands slipped slightly on the railings from sweat as I pulled myself into the driver's seat. The engine was still running. I slammed the door shut and looked out across the field. For a moment, nothing moved. Then about 20 yards away, the wheat slowly parted, and something impossibly tall rose up above the crops. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The figure rising above the wheat was easily 9 feet tall, maybe more. Its body looked impossibly thin, like a skeleton wrapped in dark fabric. The arms hung so low that the hands nearly brushed the tops of the wheat stalks. But the worst part wasn't the height. It was the way it moved. Its joints bent strangely, almost like they were attached in the wrong places. When it straightened fully, its head tilted toward the combine, toward me. Even from 20 yards away, I could feel it watching. I slammed the combine into gear. The engine roared loudly as I drove forward, crushing the wheat beneath the massive wheels. My only thought was to reach the gravel road that led back to the farmhouse. But as I glanced into the side mirror, the thing had already stepped into the path behind me, and it was following the combine. The combine wasn't built for speed. Even at full power, the machine crawled across the field like a slow-moving tank. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white as I pushed it toward the distant road. Behind me, the wheat kept bending. At first, the creature moved slowly, matching the combine's pace. Every few seconds, I caught glimpses of it through the mirrors, its tall silhouette weaving between the crops. Then it suddenly stopped. I felt a moment of relief, thinking maybe it had finally given up. But that relief lasted less than 3 seconds, because the wheat, about 50 yards to my right, suddenly exploded apart. The creature had somehow moved across the field faster than anything that size should have been able to. Now it was running parallel to the combine, its long limbs gliding through the wheat like a giant insect. And it was slowly cutting me off from the road. The gravel road was less than 100 yards away when the creature suddenly vanished into the wheat again. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I had outrun it. The combine continued grinding forward, its massive wheels crushing rows of wheat as the road slowly grew closer. My eyes kept darting between the mirrors and the field ahead, expecting the creature to appear again. But the wheat behind me stayed still. No movement, no sound, just endless darkness stretching across the farmland. Then something slammed against the side of the combine. The entire machine shook violently. Metal groaned as something massive struck the side panel. I nearly lost control of the steering wheel. Before I could react, a long, pale arm suddenly dragged across the glass window beside me. The fingers were impossibly long, and the skin looked stretched and gray, almost like it had never seen sunlight. Then slowly, the creature's face began rising toward the window. I will never forget that face. At first, I thought it didn't have one at all. The head that slowly rose beside the glass was smooth and pale, stretched over a skull that looked too large for its body. Where the eyes should have been, there were only two deep shadows. But as it pressed closer to the window, something inside those shadows moved. Two small points of light appeared, like reflections in the dark. It was looking directly at me. I panicked and slammed the combine harder toward the road. The machine lurched forward, bouncing violently as the wheels hit the edge of the gravel. The sudden jolt threw the creature off balance. Its long arms slid off the window, and the massive body fell back into the wheat with a heavy crash. I didn't stop driving until I reached the farmhouse nearly a mile away. That was 3 years ago. And every summer, when the wheat grows tall again, I sometimes see something standing out there, watching the house. My name is Liam Carter, and this happened 3 years ago when I was working as a contractor in a small Saskatchewan town called Willow Creek. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everyone. One gas station, a diner, a few scattered houses, and endless farmland surrounding the town like an ocean of grass. Most people there had lived their entire lives in the same houses their grandparents built. That's how I ended up working on the Willow Creek house. The place had been empty for nearly 15 years after the previous owner died. A couple from the city had recently bought it and hired me to renovate the basement before they moved in. When I first saw the house, I immediately understood why it had stayed empty for so long. The building sat alone at the edge of town, surrounded by leaning trees and rusted fencing. The windows were dusty, and the wooden porch creaked with every step. But the strangest thing was the basement door. It had been nailed shut from the outside. At first, I assumed the boards were there to keep animals out. Old houses like that often had raccoons or stray dogs trying to crawl into crawl spaces. But when I mentioned the nailed door to the property owner, he looked confused. "I didn't put those there," he said. The couple had only bought the property 2 weeks earlier, and according to the real estate paperwork, the house had been sealed since the last owner died. No one had lived there since. Still, my job was simple. Open the basement, inspect the foundation, and begin repairs. So the next morning I grabbed my crowbar and pulled the boards loose one by one. The old wood snapped easily, falling away from the door. Behind them was a thick metal handle coated in rust. When I pulled the basement door open, a wave of cold air rolled out from the darkness below. Not the normal cool air of a cellar. This felt unnaturally cold. And somewhere deep in that basement, something moved. I froze at the top of the basement stairs. At first, I told myself it was probably just a loose board or something falling deeper inside the house. Old places make strange noises all the time. Wood shifts, pipes creak, animals sometimes sneak into places you wouldn't expect. But the sound I heard didn't match any of that. It sounded like something dragging slowly across the floor. I leaned forward slightly and tried to see into the basement. the staircase disappeared into a thick darkness that swallowed the weak daylight coming from above. Dust floated in the air, drifting lazily in the cold draft. "Hello?" I called down. My voice echoed faintly through the space. No response. After a few seconds, the dragging noise stopped completely. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost like the basement itself was holding its breath. I grabbed a flashlight from my truck and returned to the top of the stairs. Then I aimed the beam downward, and halfway down the steps, I saw scratches on the walls. The scratches ran along the wooden walls beside the staircase, deep grooves carved into the boards, like something had repeatedly dragged its hands or claws along them. They weren't random either. The marks formed long vertical lines that stretched upward, as if something had tried to climb the stairs from below. I crouched down to examine them more closely. The wood had been gouged deeply, splintered outward in jagged strips. Whatever made those marks had used serious force. And there were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. A strange chill crept down my spine as I realized something else. The scratches weren't old. The wood inside them was still pale and fresh compared to the darker boards around it. That meant they had been made recently. Suddenly, from somewhere in the darkness at the bottom of the stairs, I heard the dragging sound again. Slow, heavy, and this time, it was coming closer. The dragging sound slowly climbed the staircase. At first, it was faint, like something shifting across the concrete floor at the bottom of the basement. But with every passing second, the noise grew louder and more distinct. Something was definitely moving up the stairs. My body locked in place as the flashlight trembled in my hand. The beam shook across the scratched wooden walls and the dark steps below. Then I heard it clearly. A slow scraping noise, followed by the dull thud of something heavy being pulled upward one step at a time. It didn't sound like footsteps. It sounded like something dragging its own body. My throat felt dry as I forced myself to lean forward slightly, pointing the flashlight deeper down the staircase. The beam reached halfway down the steps. For a second, there was nothing there. Then something pale briefly slid across the bottom step and disappeared back into the darkness. And whatever it was, it had long fingers. Every instinct told me to slam the basement door shut and leave. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when you're young and convinced that everything has a logical explanation. I slowly stepped onto the first stair. The wood creaked under my weight, echoing down into the basement. The cold air rising from below brushed against my face, carrying a strange smell with it. Not rot, not mold. Something worse. It smelled like damp earth and old metal. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and moved down another step, then another. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. Halfway down the staircase, the beam finally reached the basement floor. The light revealed an empty concrete room. Old shelves lined the walls, rusted tools hung from nails. A broken workbench sat in the corner. Nothing moved. For a moment, I almost laughed at myself. Then I noticed something behind the staircase. A narrow tunnel opening carved into the dirt wall, and fresh scratches leading into it. For a moment, I just stood there staring at the tunnel. It looked like something had been digging through the dirt wall for years. The opening was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, but the inside stretched deeper into darkness than my flashlight could reach. Fresh dirt had been pushed onto the basement floor in small piles. And those scratches I saw earlier, they continued along the edges of the tunnel entrance. I knelt down slowly, aiming the flashlight inside. The beam illuminated packed dirt walls and a narrow path disappearing into the earth beneath the house. Whoever, or whatever, had made this tunnel had been moving through it often. The ground inside looked recently disturbed. Probably some kind of animal den, I muttered to myself. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. No animal could make scratches like the ones on the stairs. Then from somewhere deep inside the tunnel, I heard it again. That same slow dragging sound. And this time, it was coming toward me. The sound echoed through the tunnel like something sliding through wet soil. Slow, deliberate. My flashlight beam trembled as I leaned closer, trying to see deeper into the narrow passage. The dirt walls reflected the light weakly, creating long, twisting shadows. Then something moved far inside the tunnel. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shifting shadow. But then the beam caught a glimpse of pale skin. A long arm slowly crawled forward through the dirt. The fingers were thin and stretched unnaturally long, bending as they clawed against the tunnel floor. Dirt crumbled beneath them as the hand dragged itself closer. My brain struggled to understand what I was looking at. Whatever was inside that tunnel wasn't walking. It was pulling itself forward. And behind that arm, something else was moving in the darkness. Something bigger. The moment I saw that hand pulling itself out of the tunnel, my body finally reacted. I stumbled backward across the basement floor, nearly dropping the flashlight. The beam swung wildly across the walls, flashing over rusted tools and empty shelves as I scrambled toward the stairs. Behind me, the sound in the tunnel suddenly grew louder. Dirt collapsed as something forced its way forward. The scraping of those long fingers against the concrete echoed through the basement. I risked one quick glance back. The pale arm had stretched completely out of the tunnel now, gripping the edge of the opening with those thin, unnatural fingers. Slowly, something behind it began pushing forward. I saw the outline of a shoulder, then part of a head. But the proportions were all wrong. The body looked twisted, like it had spent years crawling through spaces far too small for a human. I didn't wait to see the rest. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time and burst through the basement door into the daylight. I slammed the basement doors shut and dropped the crowbar across the handles, my hands shaking so badly I could barely breathe. For several seconds, I just stood there on the grass, staring down at the wooden doors, waiting for something to start pounding from below. But nothing happened. The yard remained completely silent. The wind moved gently through the tall grass around the old farmhouse, and the quiet Saskatchewan countryside stretched out peacefully in every direction. If someone had driven past at that moment, they would have thought nothing was wrong. But I never went back into that basement again. A few weeks later, I heard that the new owners decided to seal the cellar permanently with concrete. They didn't give a reason. But one of the workers told me something strange. While they were pouring the concrete, they heard scratching from the other side of the basement wall, deep underground, still trying to dig its way out. My name is Sarah Whitman, and this happened when I was 19, living on the outskirts of a small Saskatchewan town called Pinewood. The town itself was tiny. One main road, a few intersecting streets, and then miles of dense forest and farmland stretching in every direction. Everyone knew everyone, and nothing ever happened. Or so we thought. I had just moved into my grandmother's old house after she passed. It sat on a quiet stretch of Pinewood Road, far enough from the main street that the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the occasional passing car. Across the road lived Mr. Aldridge, a man in his 60s who had been in that house his entire life. He was quiet, kept to himself, but always waved politely when I passed by. Then one morning, I woke to find his mailbox empty, the front porch untouched. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it. That is, until the neighbors told me he hadn't been seen for weeks. At first, I assumed he had gone on a trip, maybe visiting family in the city, something normal. But the more I asked around, the more uneasy I became. No one had seen him leave. No cars, no lights in the windows at night. Curiosity got the better of me, and one evening, I decided to walk across the road to check the house. The porch creaked under my steps as I approached. The front door was slightly ajar, swinging slowly in the wind. I called out, "Mr. Aldridge?" No answer. The living room was dark, dusty, and filled with a faint smell of mildew. But what caught my attention was the wall of photographs, hundreds of Polaroids taped in a chaotic grid. Most of them were of the town, streets, people going about their lives. And in nearly every photo, I noticed something chilling. A figure lurking in the background, always standing just out of focus, tall, thin, and featureless, watching. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I studied the photos more closely. Each one seemed ordinary at first. People walking dogs, children playing, cars parked along the road. But in almost every image, there was a shadowy figure lurking somewhere in the frame. Sometimes behind a tree, sometimes through a window, always too tall and too thin to be human. I dropped the camera flash I had brought to illuminate the room and stepped back. My heart was pounding. What kind of person would take hundreds of pictures of people in town like this? And why? Why had Mr. Aldridge not mentioned it? Then I noticed the Polaroids of his own home. I squinted at them, focusing on the staircase leading to his basement. There it was again, that same tall, thin shadow, just barely visible in the corner of the shot. A cold wave of dread hit me. Something wasn't right here, and it had been watching him. Possibly for years. I backed away from the wall, trying to shake off the growing fear. My first thought was to call the police, but something about the room made me hesitate. There was no sign of a struggle, no obvious clue as to what had happened to Mr. Aldridge. Just emptiness and those countless Polaroids. I stepped toward the basement door at the back of the house. Something about it felt wrong. The handle was cold to the touch, even though it was a warm evening outside. As I turned the knob, a low scraping sound echoed from below. I froze. It wasn't the usual creak of old wood. It was deliberate, slow, like something dragging itself along the concrete floor. I shined my flashlight down the basement stairs. The beam revealed nothing at first, just dark, damp concrete and scattered boxes. Then I saw it. A thin, pale hand slowly emerging from the shadows, reaching toward the stairs. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair as my heart raced. The hand lingered at the bottom of the stairs, pale and elongated, with fingers that seemed too long, too flexible, bending in ways human fingers never could. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but something made me stay. Fear mixed with curiosity. I needed to know what had happened to Mr. Aldridge. Slowly, I inched toward the basement door again, flashlight shaking in my hand. As I reached the top step, the scraping grew louder. It wasn't just one hand anymore. There was a low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled up from the concrete floor. I swallowed hard. The basement was empty, but my light caught a glimpse of movement near the far corner, a tall, thin shadow slowly emerging from the darkness, featureless, silent, and impossibly still as it glided across the floor toward the stairs. I froze, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I took a cautious step back. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Shadows play tricks. Old houses make strange noises. Maybe it was an animal. But nothing in that basement resembled an animal. Nothing moved like this. The shadow crept closer, gliding almost silently across the cracked concrete floor. Its body was unnaturally thin, its head too large for its shoulders, and its limbs moved in ways that made my stomach twist. I wanted to run, but I knew the stairs were my only escape. Slowly, I edged toward them, shining the flashlight directly at the figure. For a moment, I saw something horrifying. Its head turned slightly toward me. No face, no features, just a pale, smooth surface with two dark pits where eyes might have been. A sudden scraping sound echoed from beneath it, and I realized the basement floor was littered with deep, fresh scratches, as if the figure had been digging, dragging, waiting. The shadow moved closer to the stairs, gliding silently across the basement floor. Its limbs bent in ways that made my stomach churn, and every step it took seemed to scrape the floor with a soft, wet sound. I took a deep breath and tried to focus. I had to get out. Slowly, I began climbing the stairs backward. Flashlight pointed directly at the figure. Each step creaked under my weight, sending echoes through the basement. The closer I got to the top, the closer it seemed to come as well. I could feel the cold air radiating from it, like the room itself had frozen around this presence. Then, suddenly, it stopped moving. I froze too. The beam of the flashlight caught its featureless face in profile, unnervingly close, just a few feet from the bottom of the stairs. Its dark pits stared at me. Or at least, I thought they did. A low, rumbling hiss vibrated through the air, chilling me to the bone. I scrambled the last few steps and burst through the basement door into the main floor. My flashlight beams shook violently as I tried to illuminate the room. But the figure was gone. The basement was empty. I backed away slowly, my breath ragged. The air was heavy with a cold, metallic smell, like rust and earth mixed together. My hands trembled as I pressed the flashlight against the basement door, trying to convince myself the nightmare was over. Then I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps on the floorboards below. Not upstairs, not outside, but directly under the basement floor. My heart pounded. The Polaroids on the wall flashed in my mind, and I realized with dread what they had all been documenting. The shadow had been watching Mr. Aldridge from below, moving through the floorboards like a predator. I knew I wasn't safe. Not here. Not anywhere near that house. And somewhere beneath the floor, something was waiting. I backed away from the basement door, heart hammering, sweat rolling down my temples. Every instinct screamed to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck in the wooden floorboards. The soft, deliberate scraping continued beneath me, echoing faintly through the walls and floor. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was coming closer, moving methodically like it knew exactly where I was standing. I stumbled backward into the living room, knocking over a chair. The beam of my flashlight swung wildly, catching glimpses of shadowy corners. For a moment, I swore I saw the figure flicker at the edge of the light, just barely visible, then vanish again. A cold wave of dread filled me. Whoever, or whatever, had been watching Mr. Aldridge wasn't finished. I grabbed my coat and bolted out the front door into the cold Saskatchewan night, glancing back only once. From the darkness inside the house, I thought I saw the faint outline of a tall, featureless figure standing at the basement doorway, as if it had been waiting for me to leave. I ran down Pinewood Road toward the main street, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The cool night air slapped my face, but I didn't dare stop. I had to get to a place with people, lights, and safety. Later, I called the police and reported Mr. Aldridge missing. When they finally entered the house, the basement and the tunnel beneath it were completely empty. No traces of the creature, no sign of struggle, nothing to indicate what I had seen. Weeks later, neighbors whispered that Mr. Aldridge had vanished without a trace. His house remained empty for years afterward. Sometimes, when I drive past the house late at night, I see something in the basement window. A shadowy figure, too tall, too thin, featureless, staring back at the road. I don't go near that house anymore. And I never walk Pinewood Road alone after dark. My name is Ethan Marshall, and this happened during a summer I spent at my family's cabin on Red Pine Lake, a small, isolated lake in northern Saskatchewan. The lake was surrounded by dense pine forests, with only a narrow dirt road connecting it to the nearest town. Most days were quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you can hear every tiny sound. One evening, around dusk, a thick fog rolled in from the water. I'd seen fog before, but this was different. It wasn't light or drifting. It crept across the lake like a living thing, hugging the shoreline and spreading into the forest with almost deliberate intent. I went outside to watch it, curious. That's when I noticed something strange. Shapes were moving through the fog, tall, thin silhouettes gliding just above the water's surface, too fast for a boat, too quiet for anything human. Something about the movement made my skin crawl. They were watching. And they weren't alone. I ran back inside the cabin and grabbed my binoculars. From the porch, I tried to make sense of the shapes, but the fog was thick, almost suffocating. Then I heard it. A low, guttural hum rising from somewhere in the fog, vibrating through the air and chilling me to the bone. The sound didn't echo, it just existed, like the fog itself was alive. I focused the binoculars, and what I saw made my stomach twist. The silhouettes weren't human. Their limbs were too long, their heads slightly tilted in ways no human head should bend. And they seemed to float just above the water's surface. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. But the hum continued, growing louder, resonating with the trees and the water alike. Then one figure broke away from the rest and slowly turned toward the cabin, as if it had spotted me. I felt a chill run through me, realizing I was being watched, and I wasn't supposed to be there. I stumbled backward into the cabin, nearly tripping over a chair. My hands shook as I slammed the door and locked it. The fog pressed against the windows like it had weight, and through the glass, I could still make out the tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the lake. Motionless, but somehow alive with intent. I tried to convince myself it was just the fog playing tricks. Mist and shadows can deceive your eyes, right? But the figure didn't move like a shadow. It glided, smooth and deliberate, unaffected by wind or water. I ran to the porch again, binoculars in hand, and realized the fog had shifted unnaturally, flowing around shapes that shouldn't exist. More silhouettes appeared, emerging from the mist, surrounding the cabin from the shoreline. A low, resonant hum began again, vibrating through the cabin walls and floorboards. The sound was so deep, it felt inside my bones, and for the first time, I felt truly trapped. I retreated to the back of the cabin, pressing my back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The dirt road was blocked by dense fog, and the shoreline had figures gliding silently across it. The hum grew louder, now almost a chanting rhythm, resonating with the fog itself. I realized the shapes weren't just moving. They were coordinating, spreading out in a way that suggested intelligence. My heart raced as I glanced toward the lake again. One figure lifted its head, or what passed for a head, and I thought I saw faint glowing indentations where eyes might be. Then the fog shifted suddenly, flowing over the water toward the cabin as if it were alive. I could hear faint scraping sounds against the wooden porch outside. The realization hit me. Whatever these things were, they were preparing to come closer. I grabbed the heaviest chair I could find and positioned it against the cabin door, my hands trembling as the fog pressed closer. Every shadow outside seemed to stretch unnaturally, merging with the mist. I could just barely make out the tall, thin shapes moving toward the cabin, sliding across the water and shore without making a sound. The hum intensified, reverberating through the floorboards and walls like the cabin itself was resonating with it. My pulse felt deafening in my ears, and I realized I had never felt fear this deep, the kind that burrows into your bones. I stepped toward the window, peering through the thick fog. One figure had paused near the tree line, standing perfectly still as if it had sensed I was watching. Its head tilted slightly, featureless and smooth, yet somehow aware. Then, without warning, the fog behind it began to move like a wave, advancing rapidly across the lake toward the cabin. I backed away, realizing there was no escaping this. I rushed to the back door, desperate for an escape, but the fog had already covered the path to the dirt road. Every sound was amplified, the scraping of invisible limbs across the porch, the hum vibrating through the wooden floor, and the soft swish of the fog moving unnaturally over the water. The figures were closer now. One of them reached toward the porch railing, its long, spindly fingers brushing against the wood. The scraping of claws on wood sent chills down my spine. I could see the faint outline of more figures emerging, circling the cabin, almost herding me into the corner of the room. I realized with a cold certainty, they weren't just watching. They were waiting for me to panic, and the fog was their tool, swallowing everything familiar and safe. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and swung it toward the nearest figure. For a moment, it paused, then vanished into the mist like it had never been there. The fog pressed closer, wrapping around the cabin like living tendrils. I could see the figures now more clearly. Tall, elongated silhouettes with smooth, featureless heads, gliding just above the ground and water. Each movement was deliberate, calculated, as though they knew exactly where I was. I backed into the corner of the living room, clutching the flashlight like it was my only defense. The low hum reverberated through the cabin, vibrating the walls and floor. The figures didn't need to knock. They didn't need to open doors. The fog itself seemed to carry them inside, seeping under the door and curling around my ankles like cold fingers. One figure stopped just beyond the fog's edge, tilting its head as if studying me. I felt a strange compulsion to look away, but I couldn't. My fear anchored me in place. Then I heard a new sound, a whispering voice rising from the fog, soft but distinctly articulate, repeating words I didn't understand, but felt burned into my mind. The whispering grew louder, filling the room and rattling the glass windows. It was alien, yet oddly human. A chorus of voices blending into a low hum that resonated with the fog itself. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound penetrated anyway, vibrating through my skull. I realized with dread that the fog wasn't just surrounding the cabin. It was pushing me toward the back wall, herding me like prey. The figures emerged fully now, their long limbs stretching unnaturally, some partially obscured by the mist, others fully visible and gliding silently across the floor. I swung the flashlight again, trying to scare them away. For a moment, it flickered across one figure's featureless head, and I saw it tilt in response, almost like a predator acknowledging its prey. Then the fog shifted, advancing through the cabin in waves, wrapping around furniture, floorboards, and walls, consuming everything familiar. I knew I had minutes, maybe seconds. I pressed myself against the far wall, heart hammering as the fog continued to pour in, curling around every corner of the cabin. The elongated figures glided silently through the mist, their featureless heads tilting toward me in mocking curiosity. The whispering escalated into a chilling chorus, words unrecognizable yet strangely familiar, like a memory I could not place. The fog moved with intelligence, pushing me toward the open back door, toward the edge of the lake. I realized with horror that escape might lead straight into the unknown. One figure advanced slowly, its limbs bending in impossible angles as it approached. Its long, spindly fingers brushed the floor, scraping against the wooden boards with a soft, wet sound that made my stomach twist. I gripped the flashlight tighter, swinging it wildly, but the figures didn't recoil. They moved with purpose, herding me toward the porch and into the thick fog beyond, as if the lake itself were part of their design. I stumbled onto the porch, blinded by the thick fog curling around my legs. The lake reflected nothing but white mist, but the shapes were all around me, floating above the water, gliding silently across the shoreline, surrounding the cabin like predators closing in. I ran blindly, tripping on tree roots along the dirt road. The whispering and hum followed me, vibrating in the air and through the ground, impossible to escape. Behind me, I could just barely see shadowy figures moving through the fog, waiting, watching, guiding me further into the forest. I never returned to Red Pine Lake after that summer. Locals say the fog sometimes rolls in early, thicker and heavier than it should be, and that anyone who wanders near the shoreline at night can hear the low hum and whispering carried by the wind. I learned the hard way. Some places in Saskatchewan are not meant to be walked alone. The lake doesn't just reflect the fog, it breeds it, and whatever lives inside waits for the curious. My name is Lucas Harding, and this happened when I was 19, working a summer job at my uncle's farm near Willow Creek, a small, isolated Saskatchewan town surrounded by dense forests and marshlands. The locals often spoke of strange sightings near the creek at night, but I never believed them. Willow Creek was quiet, sleepy, and miles away from any real civilization. Still, the stories whispered about the Lantern Man, a figure seen carrying a dim, flickering lantern, wandering the marshes with no clear purpose. People said it lured travelers into the swamp, and some never returned. I laughed it off, thinking it was just superstition. Until one night, after working late in the barn, I saw a faint orange glow moving among the fog rising from the creek. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the source. The glow seemed to drift closer and farther at will, moving with a rhythm that didn't match the wind, almost as if it were alive. My unease grew with every step I took. As I approached, the glow took shape. A tall, thin figure emerged from the fog, its lantern casting long, flickering shadows across the water and reeds. Its head was obscured beneath a hood or cowl, but its movements were unnatural, gliding silently over the wet ground as if it didn't quite touch it. I froze, heart pounding, flashlight shaking in my hand. The figure stopped and turned slowly toward me, the lantern light glinting off something metallic. Perhaps eyes? I couldn't tell. The air around it was cold, damp and thick, pressing against my chest as if the fog itself were alive. I thought about running, but the soft, deliberate footsteps behind me made me hesitate. Something about the lantern man's presence made it clear. It wasn't just a wandering figure. It knew I was there, and it wanted me to follow. I swallowed hard and took a cautious step backward, realizing that I might be trapped in the marsh with something that wasn't human. I stepped back carefully, my boots sinking into the soft, wet mud of the marsh. The lantern man didn't move immediately, but I felt the glow of the lantern pressing against my eyes, as if it could see me even in the dense fog. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying reeds, and every step I took seemed amplified by the silence around me. Then it moved, slowly, deliberately, gliding closer, the lantern swinging with a rhythmic sway. I noticed its hands, or what I assumed were hands, were unnaturally long and thin, fingers bending at odd angles. Its hooded face remained featureless, yet I felt its gaze penetrating through the fog, through me. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized the figure's path was curving around me, herding me deeper into the reeds and toward the dark waters of the creek. A low hum began rising from the fog, vibrating through the ground, like the marsh itself was alive and responding to the lantern man. I stumbled over a tree root and fell forward, mud splashing across my arms and face. The lantern man paused, tilting its hooded head slightly, as if amused. The hum in the air grew louder, reverberating through my chest, and I felt my heartbeat echoing unnaturally in my ears. The fog thickened around me, wrapping the marsh in a wall of white that seemed almost alive, pulsating with the lantern man's presence. Shadows flickered through the mist, and I could just barely make out other shapes moving in the distance, following its lead. I scrambled to my feet, trying to retreat, but the path I had come from was gone, swallowed entirely by fog. The only thing in front of me was the figure, swaying its lantern in a slow, hypnotic rhythm, beckoning me closer. A sick realization hit me. The lantern man didn't just wander the marsh. It hunted, and it had already decided I was its prey. I pressed my back against a cluster of reeds, trying to think. My heart pounded as the lantern man glided closer, the orange glow cutting through the fog like a knife. The hum from the marsh had grown into a resonant vibration, like the earth itself was responding to the figure. I realized that the lantern's light wasn't random. It was tracking me, following my every movement. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept snapping back to that faint glow. Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet the fog made it impossible to see the path. Suddenly, the lantern man stopped and then raised the lantern high. The light flickered violently, casting long, distorted shadows across the reeds. I could see hints of movement deeper in the fog. More figures, gliding silently, almost like extensions of the lantern man itself. I swallowed hard, knowing I had to make a choice: follow the faint trail it allowed, or be swallowed entirely by the fog and whatever lay within. I stepped forward cautiously, my boots sinking into the wet, uneven ground. The lantern man glided silently beside me, its lantern casting a wavering orange light that barely illuminated the twisting path of reeds and water channels. Every step I took seemed to echo unnaturally, despite the muffling effect of the fog. The hum intensified, vibrating through my bones, and I realized it was reacting to my presence, growing louder whenever I hesitated or slowed down. I tried to call out, but my voice was swallowed instantly by the fog. The marsh was alive with it, moving and shifting as if it had a consciousness of its own. Ahead, the faint glow of another lantern appeared, smaller, lower to the ground. I realized with growing horror that there were multiple lantern men, each guiding me farther into the marsh, toward some unknown destination. Panic rose in my chest as I understood the truth. I wasn't walking through a marsh. I was being led into a trap. I stumbled into a shallow pool of water, sending ripples across the marsh. The lantern light danced across the fog, reflecting off the surface, and I realized with a cold shock that my reflection didn't match my movements exactly. It lagged slightly behind, twisted in unnatural ways, like something else was mimicking me. The lantern man paused, tilting its featureless head as if acknowledging what I had seen. Then it began moving again, gliding silently over the reeds, lantern swaying rhythmically, drawing me farther from the safety of the barn and toward the heart of the marsh, where shadows thickened and the fog grew impossibly dense. I tried to resist, but the fog seemed to press against me, urging me forward, and the faint hum now had a chanting quality, like it was calling out in some forgotten language. My fear became almost paralyzing, yet curiosity or survival instinct kept me moving. I could sense that whatever lay ahead was waiting, patient and intent on claiming me as it had others before. The marsh opened into a small clearing, dimly illuminated by the lanterns. More figures appeared at the edges, tall, thin, and hooded, flickering in and out of the fog like phantoms. The hum had grown into a deep, vibrating resonance, shaking the ground beneath my feet. I realized with growing terror that the figures weren't just leading me, they were encircling me, herding me toward the center of the clearing. The lantern lights formed an almost perfect ring, their glow casting shadows that danced across the water and reeds in a surreal, hypnotic rhythm. The closest lantern man raised the lantern higher, the glow now blinding. I could feel the warmth of it, almost suffocating. Yet its light revealed nothing of a face, nothing human, just featureless darkness beneath the hood. I understood then. They were testing me, gauging my fear, and the fog, the marsh. And these lanterns were all part of an ancient trap I had unknowingly walked into. I froze in the center of the clearing, heart hammering, as the lanterns formed a ring around me. The hum and whispers filled my ears, vibrating through the fog and ground, and I could feel the figures pressing closer without moving an inch. My eyes darted from one hooded shape to another, all featureless, all watching me, studying my every move. Panic clawed at me, and instinct finally overrode fear. I turned and ran blindly toward a narrow path I hoped would lead back to the barn. The fog seemed to swallow the marsh behind me, erasing my trail. The lantern men glided silently, following without chasing, herding me forward as though guiding me toward an unknown destination. The closer I got to the edge of the clearing, the more I realized the hum wasn't just sound. It was alive, pulsating in rhythm with my racing heart. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones, in every breath I took. I stumbled out of the marsh onto the old dirt path leading to the barn, gasping for breath. The fog thinned slightly behind me, and the lantern men slowly disappeared back into the mist as if they had never been there. My legs burned from the sprint, and my chest heaved with exhaustion. When I finally reached the barn, I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, trembling. The orange glow of the lanterns was gone, but the hum lingered faintly in the air, a reminder that they were always watching, always waiting. I never returned to Willow Creek after that summer. Locals told me that the lantern man has been seen for centuries, guiding or trapping anyone who wanders too far into the marsh. I had been lucky. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispers through the reeds, I swear I can still hear the faint hum of the lantern man's lantern, calling from the fog, waiting for the next curious soul.